Daily Devotion with Pastor Balla for May 17th, 2022 from 1 Corinthians chapter 10, Protected and Guided by God. As Christians, we are protected and guided by God. There are times when we may not realize the wonderful protection that God has for us. However, God is still there for us. Paul continues in his letter writing to the Christians in Corinth with this theme from 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 1. For I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea. The fathers that Paul is referencing are the people of Israel as they were leaving their slavery in Egypt. In Exodus chapter 14, God was leading the people of Israel with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And when Pharaoh changed his mind and started to pursue the people of Israel to recapture them and to reslave them, the pillar of cloud came between Pharaoh and the people of Israel for the protection of the people of Israel until the Red Sea was parted. So Paul is reminding the people of God's protection in the past. Verse 2, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. What does Paul mean by they were all baptized into Moses? Well, the pillar of cloud did not rain upon them. What Paul is trying to teach us is that baptism saves us. You see, baptism separates us and protects us from evil, just as God protected the people of Israel with the pillar of cloud by day. And God intervenes between us and evil. So, Paul uses that illustration of baptism. Verse 3, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. You need to remember that in the wilderness, God provided the people of Israel with food from heaven. They called it manna. And water from a rock. Likewise, our nourishment that God provides for us, that food and drink, you could say that spiritual nourishment is in the Lord's Supper. And Paul will soon do a little bit more teaching about the Lord's Supper. Verse 5, nevertheless, with most of them God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Wow. God was directly protecting and caring for the people of Israel, and yet the people of Israel still rebelled against God. God was doing everything for them. Well, you also need to remember, God is doing everything for us, like baptism, the Lord's Supper. God gives us His word, and yet we also still rebel. So you might be thinking, well, what kind of example does this leave for us? Paul does remind us in the next verse, verse 6. Now these things took place as examples for us, that we might not desire evil as they did. So can we learn from other people's mistakes? Maybe or maybe not, because we still make the same mistakes. But yet God is still taking care of us and protecting us through our baptism and feeding us through the Lord's Supper today. But yet the people of Israel still fell away from God and disobeyed. So maybe we can't learn from the past mistakes from God's people. Whether we're able to learn from them or not, God is still going to take care of us. He still provides for us. He still forgives us our sins. Faith that God is indeed taking care of us, even when we don't see the pillar of cloud by day or the pillar of fire by night. Faith trusts that God is still there. Even when we don't see manna, food just appearing on the ground, or water coming from a rock because we're thirsty, faith trusts that God is still there. Yes, God used extraordinary means back then, but today he is still taking care of us through ordinary means. But the important thing for us today is to realize that God is still guiding and protecting us. God's peace and many blessings be with you, and thank you for listening. And please take an opportunity to share this message with others. If you have enjoyed these daily devotions, please consider making a donation to Peace Lutheran Church, 24024 West Main Street, Plainfield, Illinois, 60544. Thank you again for listening.